As photographers, I suspect that there are few things that are as satisfying and fulfilling to us than seeing our best or favorite pieces out in physical space as prints. Not only have we moved our work from the bright and shiny screen displays of our laptops and phones, making them as real and tangible as any item that you can hold in your bare hands, you've created an entirely new and exciting array of questions and decisions to explore. Was this paper the correct choice for this piece? Was paper even the appropriate medium? Would this piece be better suited for canvas or perhaps aluminium? Which medium is going to render your image in a manner that is true to your vision? When it comes to paper, what color frame will you choose? Will you include a mount? How wide will your mount be? Will you only use glass? Or might you consider acrylic? What size will you choose? But before you worry about your frame, before you measure your mounts, what paper will you print to? What textures do you choose? Do you want your image to shine like a diamond or soothe the atmosphere like velvet? Do you want a blend of both? Or, like me, are you happy with a little bit of it all? My name is Natalie. I'm a photographer and I print my work every now and then. I enjoy the process of identifying how different papers affect the final presentation of my work, and today I will talk you through my thoughts on Fujifilm Crystal Archive DP2 silk paper. We will investigate the texture, the shine, the blacks, the whites, and the color density. We will briefly compare how these prints measure up to the original digital source images, and we will briefly compare this paper to other papers available at my printers. I currently print my work from Saal in Germany, and for these sets of prints, I explored their SoftTouch Matte paper, which combines their classic paper with a lamination foil that results in a very matte texture, which they say is comparable to peach skin. Additionally, I will touch on their Artline paper, which is a dimpled textured paper which has provided me with excellent color reproduction, and their art print paper, which appears to feature lined indentations, promoting a high quality print. Join me as I explore these papers as part of my own learning process, while I navigate through the steps required to understand how different papers affect the quality of the final presentation of my photography. This Fujifilm Crystal Archive DP2 paper has been described as being great for portraits and for weddings. This is a relatively small portrait, but let's zoom in here and take a look at that texture, that honeycomb texture, and how it renders the skin tones, how it renders color, how it renders shadow, and how it handles detail. This SoftTouch Matte paper has been described as having a peach skin or a rose petal texture. It's soft and velvety smooth and renders color density with such richness and packed in color. The one thing that it doesn't pack is a punch. Blacks are not pure black. The Dmax is not quite as high as you would find in, for example, the Fujifilm Crystal Archive DP2 paper. That is not a train smash, and there are photos out there that would be well suited to this type of matted, textured, velvety paper. The images that I'll be using for comparison purposes are this abandoned building on the seaside, exposed to medium format Fuji Pro 400H expired film. I'll be comparing these rocks on the seaside, exposed to 35mm Kodak Ektar 100 film, and I'll also be comparing this photo over here of the Lido, also exposed to medium format Fuji Pro 400H. Additionally, I'll be comparing some digital black and white photographs. I'll be comparing some Artline and art print papers on some vibrant and punchy photographs, and the Artline paper would be a more dimpled type of thick paper, and the art print, I'd say, is a more fibrous, laterally fibrous paper. And all these dimples and lines and textures that you see in all these different types of paper will have some sort of effect or will contribute to how the ink seeps through the paper and how it retains detail, color contrast, blacks, whites, contributing to dynamic range and density and punchiness of color. I hope you enjoy the demo/analysis. Here we have a like-for-like comparison of two images. Right off the bat, bat, you can tell the difference. Because we have an empty white border surrounding each image, you can right off the bat see that the Fuji silk paper has a warm cast to it, whereas the matte paper appears to have a purer form of a white as its base. As you can tell when comparing these two images, the warm cast of the paper contributes to the overall warmth of the image of the building. If you compare the two next to each other, the matte paper does appear to be more cold or cooler or blue. Interestingly, what you will note is that the matte paper presents an image that is richer in color or more dense in its color presentation. And the Fujifilm silk paper is a little bit less dense in color, a little bit less rich in color. And I think that that is because, at least partly because, this is not a purely matte paper. There is a bit of a shine to it. And similarly to when you're editing a photo, for example, the sky, and you bring down the highlights. Bringing down the highlights in a sky will bring or reintroduce more of that original color back. Whatever colors were present in the sky, if you bring down those highlights, if you take down some whites, you'll find that your sky becomes more dense in color. And in part, I think that might be what is happening here. But also, you can see that the dynamic range in general of the silk paper, there's more of it. So you'll have brighter whites, and then you'll have darker blacks. And I think that is referred to as Dmax, the black one. So your Dmax in the silk paper is stronger, and then you've also got brighter whites despite it being warm in tone, but that will contribute to a more punchy or contrasted image. Now, whether that is to your taste or not, that is your preference, but I do feel that both papers serve decent purposes for either situation, and it all depends on what you want or what the image calls for. Now, partially driven by this increase in contrast in the silk paper, I think that you'll find that this also drives the sharpness of your image. If you look into the graffiti here, the silk paper does render a sharper image with deeper blacks, a more prominent contrast, and greater detail. But you cannot deny that this SoftTouch Matte paper provides an energy of its own that is certainly deserving of a place for your printing. Let's take a look at another comparison between two images using these two papers. Again, as you can tell by these borders, the matte paper has a more pure form of the white. Now, for this picture in particular, I'm not sure if the warm cast of the silk paper contributes as significantly to the overall feel of the image compared to the matte paper. I think the most significant contributor here is the contrast, deeper, richer blacks or shadows compared to this more matted, slightly more dull treatment of the shadows, and of course, the details in the silk paper. I think a partial contribution to the greater detail that you can see in the silk paper is the contrast, as in you've got your deep blacks and you've got your brighter highlights compared to the matte paper. But the texture of this paper, which is referred to as a honeycomb texture, contributes, I think, to how the ink seeps in and preserve some of those details. If you take a look at the clouds, the details and the contrast between the blues and whites and the grays in the clouds is more prominent in the silk paper. And because the background in this photo is a blue sky, bluish buildings, bluish clouds, when you put a warm paper or when you print it onto a warm paper, the contrast between warm and cool will become more prominent in areas where perhaps you should have had white, like you see in this photo over here. As I mentioned before, the density in color, even though the shadows are a bit dull, the density and the richness in the color really is there, and it would be interesting to test this a bit further. I'm wondering if at some point in the future, if I'm intentionally editing a photo knowing that I'm going to print on this type of matte paper, if I go a little bit heavier on the blacks and a little brighter on the whites and maybe go a little bit heavy on the warmth, I'd be curious to see what this paper looks like with a photo edited in that manner. Here we've got a set of 3 images, all of which have dark backgrounds and some punchy whites, 2 of which have been printed on the Fujifilm crystal silk paper, and 1 of which was printed on the matte paper, the SoftTouch Matte paper that we've been discussing. And putting these 3 photos next to each other, the difference in the treatment of white and black is stark. And one would have thought that a paper with a more natural, pure white, one would have thought that that paper would render contrast a bit more intensely, but that clearly isn't the case here. We've got this SoftTouch Matte paper that has a very dulled down, smooth, velvety texture to this image. And you can assume that this photo of the elephant or this photo of the lion would have shown in a similar manner, because the blacks in this koala image are deep blacks and the whites are whites, and so is the case with the elephant and the lion. And the difference, as I mentioned, is stark. Is one better than the other? That is down to personal preference. That is down to how I would have intended for the image to be visualized. But for my case, images like this, the silk paper is a more fitting paper for my type of work, particularly my type of work that is punchy and contrasty. And that is also the case with my color photos. Let's take a look at these two tree photos. The misty background of the tree was white, and as you can see by this comparison, this art line paper shows a purer, more clean version of the white compared to the Fujifilm crystal silk paper, which, as I've mentioned now a couple of times, is warmer in its tone. Now, whether that is something that you prefer or not is totally up to you. At first I was a bit concerned, but upon closer inspection I do realize that a paper with a warmer or a more eggshell rendition really suits a lot of photos beautifully, whether they be black and white or whether they be color. The texture, the honeycomb texture of the Fujifilm Crystal Silk DP really emphasizes on the detail, emphasizes on the shadows and the blacks, and emphasizes on the contrast that was intended with my photos. Don't get me wrong, this art line paper, particularly for this tree image, is gorgeous. But there is something in the mood provided by the warm eggshell undertones of this image that really bring more of the image out in terms of emotional value. Continuing on with a comparison of Fujifilm Crystal DP2 silk paper and Artline paper, which I just compared in my black and white tree image, a slightly different rendition of color, warmer tones on the silk paper, as you can see towards the left of this image over here, and also on the right of the image. I think because there is less of a sheen to this paper, even though the silk paper is not glossy, it's a lovely healthy balance between gloss and matte. The Artline paper doesn't have that sheen to it, and therefore you've got a preservation in the color and a more dense rendition of color and vibrance. Taking some time to do a very brief inspection of art print paper and Artline paper, there really isn't much to complain about. Color rendition is gorgeous, blacks are deep. I think one of the main differences that I can tell between art line and art print paper is that art print paper appears to have horizontal lines crossing through them, so the texture is fibrous and horizontal, whereas art line paper is more dimpled. And I wish that the two names could have been reversed, so that art line paper is more of the liney paper and art print paper is more of the dimpled paper, making it slightly easier to remember how to identify these papers. Each has its place. I think I deviate more towards preferring art print paper in terms of how it handles highlights and shadows and blacks and whites, and the punch in color is attractive, it's vibrant, it's dense, but not too dense. It's pretty much as your photo was made. One thing that I think makes it more expensive than other papers is that it is much thicker. So I guess that's why they're called art line and art print papers, because they resemble more of the fine art baryta or the photo rag, those types of thicknesses. I'll put the thickness on the screen right now because I can't remember how many grams per square meter or GSM it is, but it's significantly thicker than, for example, the Fujifilm Crystal Archive DP2 paper. If you'd like a deeper analysis and look at Artline and art print papers compared to these other papers that I'm discussing in more detail, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to make more prints with these papers to have a more thorough understanding of how they treat shadow highlights, contrast, color density, stuff like that.